On Sports Beat KC, the Star sports columnists Vahe, Gregorian, and Sam Mellinger dropped by to discuss several topics. We used Vahe's visit to the Stanley Cup Finals between the St. Louis Blues and Boston Bruins as a jumping-off point to wonder about Kansas City as an NHL or NBA town. Later, we break down the latest news about Chiefs wide receiver Tyreek Hill, touch on the Royals' dismal season, recall how Big Papi, former Red Sox slugger David Ortiz, inspired the Royals, and we close by talking about Sam's favorite enterprise of the Kansas City Star. This is Sports Beat KC, and I'm your host, Blair Kerkhoff. Vahe, Gregorian, and Sam Mellinger have dropped by, and Vahe literally just stopped in from an across-the-state road trip to St. Louis, where he watched Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Finals last night. So recording this on Monday, and this is less than 24 hours since the Bruins defeated the Blues. So, of course, Vahe and Sam, I want to talk about Kansas City, and it's maybe for the only time this year this podcast would lead with something other than Chiefs, Royals, college football, college basketball, sporting. Vahe, the scene must have been fantastic in St. Louis yesterday.
It really was. The only bummer about the whole thing was the Hyperloop isn't ready yet, so I couldn't get back faster. And I think I've heard the young handsome guy here refer to the Hyperloop as never going to happen. I think that's probably right, but I digress. It was a great scene. It's kind of interesting with hockey. I'd forgotten this because I hadn't really gone to some hockey coverage for a little while. You always get the morning skate. And so I went over to the morning skate at about 10:30, and I realized
this is the day of the game.
Day of the game, and I realized downtown St. Louis was a fortress. In fact, last time I remember standing down there, Blair, we were recording some video outside after one of the tournaments over there on the corner of Market and 15th, and so I knew there was no leaving after getting there at 10:30, and now you're just kind of in the icy bowels of the Enterprise Center for the whole day. But it was good because there was a lot to absorb and get caught up on. And hockey is, I love hockey. I love watching hockey. Outside, I took a little walk briefly to see what was going on. There were probably a good 40, 50,000 people in the immediate surroundings. Really cool. And the vibe really did remind me of that feeling of the Royals in 14 and 15. Consider that the Blues, 52 years, they'd never won a cup. 49 years since they've even been in a Stanley Cup final, and those were kind of phony finals because they were in the loaded expansion division. So it was great. It was a great night, and would have been more fun to cover and write about had they won. I think it would have been a really cool moment for that city, and something with a little bit of ripples over here, right? And that's part of the reason we're talking about this.
Sure, and I was going to talk about that. What does it mean when the bar on the River Market, the Blue Line. Had packed and people standing and partying outside?
They had to close the street.
Close the street for hockey fans to watching the game, and the fact that at least one of the earlier games in the Stanley Cup, where we have television ratings, was Kansas City was the fifth highest rated market. It wasn't a huge number, but it was a nice number, and to be fifth in the country behind, first of all, two of the participating cities, and the other two I think were hockey towns. The teams that
one was Providence,
Providence, which is Boston,
and Buffalo, which is hockey town, I guess, right?
Yeah. So what's the significance of that, or is there one?
I've been surprised, and I was just going to try and look it up on my phone, but I won't now. I'm curious what the TV ratings in St. Louis were for the 2014 and 2015 World Series. I wonder how much of a bleed over there is. For instance, we're just talking about, well, of course, Providence was really high. It's right by Boston. I wonder if people around the country are thinking, of course, Kansas City is high. It's right by St. Louis. There's not a lot of people here loving St. Louis necessarily, but there's people with family there. It is close. We had the game on last night. I know this is anecdotal and whatever, but we had the game on last night, and my wife, who's a big sports fan, couldn't care less about hockey, but she looks up, oh, St. Louis is in? Oh, that's cool. I hope they win.
That's a great little analogy, though. A great little glimpse.
So I wonder how much, I guess I'd be curious to look up, to know what the Stanley Cup ratings are of the last five. The TV ratings of the Stanley Cup in Kansas City, what they are in the last 5 years or so. I've never really heard of them being high until this year. So it leads me to believe that it's a St. Louis thing that there's a lot of people here who feel a connection to St. Louis. And that has boosted it. I don't know that. It's the first thing that comes to my mind because I've never thought of this as a particularly strong hockey market.
I think that is a much more realistic view of the whole thing. I mean, I'd like to think there's a kind of bubbling interest in hockey
Me
here.
too.
There is, or lingering, whatever you want to call it. But I can tell, and maybe it's because I was in St. Louis so long, and I hear from people from St. Louis that moved here. There's a little bit of a St. Louis expat factor here, and the relatives, as you say, and it's. If you just like the sport enough, you kind of, this is bandwagon time of year, right? Where you're like, let's go check it out. I did go to the Blue Line to watch the game the other night and immediately ran into a guy I knew from St. Louis.
Yeah.
And, that seemed to be the prevailing group there in a lot of ways. So it's one other thing just to introduce into this, as if we aren't spinning enough plates already, but it is interesting to think about whether there's the reciprocal concept of Chiefs interest over there to here. Now, I've heard from a lot of people there who have taken interest in the Chiefs, but the other thing I pick up on is there's sort of disgust with the NFL.
Yeah.
If I got to follow a team, it's pretty cool if the Chiefs are doing well, but it's not like, Chiefs fandom exactly. And there's a belief over there. I'm not sure whether we ever substantiated this, but that Clark Hunt did not vote to keep the Rams there, or voted for the Rams to be able to leave, and that's not a good look from that side of the state at this side of the state.
That is true.
Yeah, we did. Did we confirm that?
Yeah,
okay.
That is true. Two points to make. I was in St. Louis for the Super Bowl when the Patriots played the LA Rams. And I went into a sporting goods store, one of those gear stores, before the game Sunday afternoon, and I was told by one of the store clerks that the biggest selling jersey of the football season was Patrick Mahomes. So maybe there is a little bit of a bleed of Chiefs fandom in St. Louis. The other thing, and Sam, I'm glad you brought it up because I remember doing this story, but I did a story 3 years ago, what Kansas Cityans watched sports-wise, and it ended up being the year of 2016. And the reason I was struck by this was that was the year that the Royals were in their midst of having either the first or second highest ratings among the local market, right? So Kansas Cityans loved watching the Royals that year, and this was the year after the World Series. They loved watching the NCAA tournament because Kansas was in it and went to the Elite Eight that year. Sunday Night Baseball, NFL, they loved college basketball. The Stanley Cup, I think there were 52 metered markets. So when you see somebody's fourth, it's fourth out of 52, the 52 largest markets. And for 2016, the teams in the finals that year were Pittsburgh and San Jose, and Kansas City was the 32nd rated market for the Stanley Cup that year. So that speaks to maybe just, it's our cousins over there watching the Cup and participating in the Cup finals, and maybe football ratings in St. Louis for the AFC Championship game were higher than they would have been if two other teams, the Patriots and the Steelers, had been in the AFC title game.
There's a lot of moving parts here, too, because this is a good time to get in on the Chiefs. Regardless of whether, that bastard Stan Kroenke stole your team or not. This is just, in general, a good time to get in on the Chiefs. So that's, that's got to be part of it, too. I totally get what you just said, Vahe, too, about St. Louis was done so wrong by the Rams. In a lot of ways, they set up that franchise to fail and then blamed the city for it failing. And by they, I mean Stan Kroenke. And I totally get the idea of just being so ticked off at the NFL in general that you're done. If that's how you feel,
compounded, of course, by having already lost the Cardinals.
Yes.
So there's it's a little bit of this. Charlie Brown, they're pulling the rug out from under us, football out from under us.
And now they go to LA and they're a really good team.
Yeah, after tanking.
And they stunk for so long in St. Louis. I would be bitter. I totally get that. If they never want to watch another football game, who could blame them?
I know.
So I was just looking. The NBA Finals also didn't do very well in Kansas City, and this was 3 years ago. So. I always think about it this time of year, and this is probably the only time of year I think about Kansas City not having the NBA or the NHL with an arena 3 blocks from where we're sitting right now, which is tailor-made for one of those teams.
Sure is.
And was sold to the voters of Kansas City on the promise of having one of those.
The all but promise.
All but. I should stop short. I was going to stop short.
Is that what the term was?
It was. I mean, it was. We promised that we will get a team, and then there was a wink, but you couldn't see the wink if you listened on the radio or read in print. But there was a little bit of a wink. God, that was just wool over the eyes, man. That was bad.
So, but I do. I think about, would Kansas City support an NBA or an NHL team? What are the prospects of either one of those leagues coming here? I still, even with the interest that this area has shown in the Blues, we know that the NHL is going to expand us to Seattle, right? Is it next season or the year after? I think it's the 2021 season. Seattle becomes the 32nd NHL team. That they paired them with Las Vegas to bring it, and that seems like a nice even number for the NHL. So if there was an NHL team coming to Kansas City, it would have to be a relocated team, and the Coyotes are always the team or franchise that seems to be in the most trouble financially. But even when you hear of relocation prospects, other cities are mentioned before Kansas City, and I just don't think the NBA is viable here. But are we to be destined? We had it before, right? We've had both the NHL and the NBA,
and with an overlap, right?
Yep. They were here for 2 years. This was a 4 major league sports town from '73 until '76, and so it's amazing to think about that. But they had the new facilities. The Truman Sports Complex opened up in 1972, 73, and Kemper opened up about that time as well, 74. And so they put teams in the new facilities. And we have new facility here and relatively new in Sprint Center, but I just don't ever see it. I just don't see it happening.
I got a quick burst in me, then I want to hear from the guy who really knows. But just a couple quick thoughts. I didn't realize this till last night when I was doing some research. Did you know? I guess we can kind of rule out expansion NHL because the price tag is
over $500 million.
It was $500 for Vegas last year. When in December 2018, when it was awarded to Seattle, it was up to $650 million. So that the price is jumping every year. I don't know what associated costs are with moving a team here. I'm sure it's exorbitant, but not that, right? The question I would always have about this is: do we really see? You look at all the possible places for hockey. Does Missouri need a second NHL team? I always wonder about that. Like, wouldn't Saskatoon or
talking about a second team in either Montreal or Toronto?
Wouldn't that do better?
Oh, absolutely.
I think it would.
For sure it would.
And so that's just a preliminary thought. And I've always wondered about whether basketball here, just because there's so much, because college basketball really rules, and you could make a good case. We probably even use this term that the Jayhawks are Kansas's professional team, and no double meaning intended there, but maybe there's some that to be gathered from that. So, but what say ye, Sam?
I think we all feel the same way in this. I would adore, professionally, obviously, having another team. Personally, I would love it almost as much. The problem with hockey is there's just not much culture here. There's just not much, they talk about like sheets of ice.
There's not much ice either, not culture or ice.
And I forgot the exact number, but I think there's like 6 or 8, something like that, sheets of ice. And the number that they like to have in a market is just, and it's one factor, it's only one, but it's like 20. They want like more than twice the amount, and that's just an indication of how many people are interested in hockey. Around town. You mentioned so that's a huge hurdle. And the places they've gone in without much culture, some of them had success early, and I'm thinking of the Carolina Hurricanes, for instance, and there's been some other examples. But then once those teams kind of come back to earth, people go away. I mean, I remember, my mom lived in Durham, 20 minutes, 30 minutes from the Hurricanes. And I remember going there when they were good, and it was packed and it was fun. It was, oh my God. And then I remember going there when they were bad and there was just nobody there, and so that's not sustainable. The problem with basketball, you mentioned the $650 million expansion fee for Seattle. An NBA team, an expansion fee would be more than twice that, I would think. Whew. I mean, it would be approaching, if not reaching, $2 billion. Who here has that money? Because you can't just be worth $2 billion if the expansion fee is $2 billion. You need to be worth $3, $4, $5 billion. I don't know who that is.
Not even the guy you had a long dinner with?
I think he's worth one. I think he's worth one and some change. But you could pull together, the name escapes me, but, the Garmin people, they got some money. You can scrape together a certain level. But I just, for Kansas City to get a team, it needs Clay Bennett. That's what we need. We need just a rich old oil man that's got money to burn, and this is what he wants to do. There's a little bit of momentum. There's a grassroots effort that I will write about at some point going on to get an NBA team here. But there's so many hurdles. There is just so many hurdles. It's hard to imagine. At this point.
Let me ask this more of a question than a statement, but, and you'd probably know it best, although you grew up with it. We know that the scouts were, for lack of a better term, incompetently run. There were major issues just how they were run.
Just
right?
ill-fated from the start.
And so nothing went right with them. I know a lot less about why the Kings left. In fact, I don't really know anything about why the Kings left.
Kings left after the 84-85 season. And the NBA was still at an ebb in popularity. It was before Michael Jordan became a thing, and really there was Bird and Magic. They were going through the good times of Bird and Magic, but it hadn't soared in popularity. And by then the Kings were pretty poor. They were getting outdrawn at Kemper Arena by the Comets. The indoor soccer team was outdrawing the Kings. And not only outdrawing them, but were more popular in the community than the Kings were. So they were averaging about 7,100 at Kemper Arena for games. And the owners at the time thought that was unacceptable. And even though the NBA, again, wasn't, I don't even know if all the NBA Finals games were on in prime time then, even with Bird Magic competing against each other in the finals. But it made sense. I wasn't living here. I was about 4 years away from living here at the time, but I've read about what happened, and you didn't blame the owners for packing up and leaving especially to a market that had never had pro sports in Sacramento that just put its arms around that Kings franchise. And although they haven't had much success, had more success in Kansas City in terms of playoffs than they have in Sacramento, it was the right move. It just was. And I don't know if it's ever coming back. And to speak to one of Sam's points, Kansas City is more of a branch town than a headquarters town. And I think that's reflected in the number of people that could own a professional sports franchise. We're not Fortune 500. There were a couple of them here, but not a bunch of them. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think that helps explain why the only local owner that this city's ever had was Ewing Kauffman, right? I mean, the Hunts are Dallas. Charlie Finley, who owned the A's, was a Chicago lawyer. The Glasses are Bennettsville, Arkansas. There's no, at least for the Chiefs and Sporting is local.
Is the only one.
And Ewing Kauffman, of course. And that, in fact, that really drove the expansion of 1969. Was Kansas City had a local owner that they had identified that would would support baseball in Kansas City, and so that's just a condition that's, I don't know if it's unique to Kansas City, but it is a Kansas City condition. There's nobody with the deep pockets here. Mm-hmm. This isn't that kind of town.
Yeah. It's also, I always go back to this. It's also, and again, I would love for this to happen for so many reasons. But there's studies about market saturation is the term. And Kansas City already rates pretty high on sports saturation when you take into account not just Chiefs Royal Sporting, but NASCAR. All the Big 12 events. Like, it's just we've got a lot of stuff going on. I've heard this before, but it's just like, is there a more unlikely string of words put together than Kansas City's indoor soccer team regularly outdrew its NBA team? Like that is a sentence that is true and incredible.
And unfortunate.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because even the Comets didn't stay much longer, or that league didn't survive much longer after.
Oh yeah,
after that. That had changed. So I looked this up the other day that there's only one U.S. city that has a metropolitan area, Kansas City size, with three of the traditional four major league sports. So 2.1 million in the metro area. The only market that has more than the two pro sports that Kansas City has is Cleveland. Browns, Indians, Cavaliers, and Cleveland's a city that's actually losing population, while Kansas City is a metro area that's gaining population. Not as quickly as some, but at some point, Kansas City, if it hasn't already, will pass Cleveland in population. Cleveland's a sports crazy town. They've supported the Browns,
for some reason.
For some reason, right? But anyway, I just thought, I think that's right. I think Kansas City supports exactly what it should support.
Yeah.
And really, the months of May and June are really the only time I miss not having an NBA or an NHL team. And when the Royals are good, I miss it even less.
Yeah. Milwaukee's close. Like Green
It
Bay
depends on
is
how you want to count Green Bay.
2-3 hours away. We've made that drive, boy, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. And we got one coming up in August.
It's just it's a weird, like, you wonder, like, would Kansas City sort of, and I hate the connotation here, because it's not up to a town to support a team. It's up to the team to be worthy of the support. But would Kansas City sort of step up in a way if we got a team? I don't know. My sense is we would if it was good.
But I go back to your point about it's sort of a matter of that kind of foundation infrastructure, whatever you have, right, where it's there. The interest is so deep that it doesn't necessarily matter if you stink for a while.
Yeah.
But you could see that novelty wearing off in each of these sports. The thing the other curveball into this equation, if that's not mixing too many metaphors, is I think maybe we thought these very things about Kansas City's capacity, these numbers, before sporting made it big. And all of a sudden, that's 20,000 more people that are doing that. And I'm not sure whether I'm saying that as you never know where it'll come from, or that's another stream that's just kind of gone and means it's overwrought. I mean, you just can't keep adding.
I know that Cliff Illig, for instance, is concerned about that in some ways, and look, like, maybe he's just being protective of his money and his brand, but that's something that I've heard him talk about, of just, we're trying to build sporting into as big of a thing as we can make it. Now all of a sudden you're going to bring in other sport, and they don't overlap exactly, but there's a whole lot of overlap between. MLS season is about 51 weeks a year, it seems like, and then now all of a sudden you've got NHL and NBA tickets. Like, neither one of those things are cheap. You're looking at $50, $75 for an average ticket, let alone a good one.
All right, guys, good time to take a break, and we will be right back with the columnists. Hey, it's Blair Kerkhoff, and if you're listening to this, you love Kansas City sports, whether it's the Chiefs, Royals, Sporting, Mizzou, KU, or K-State. And no one covers these teams like the Kansas City Star. If you currently subscribe to the paper or have a digital subscription, thank you for your support. And if you don't, here's a great offer. It's called Sports Pass, unlimited digital access to every sports story and video on kansascity.com. And it's just $30 for the first year. It's the best sports value in town, just 8 cents a day or $2.50 a month. You can't beat that. Subscribe now at kansascity.com/sportspass. We are back with Sam Mellinger and Vahe Gregorian, the sports columnist for the Kansas City Star. Let's touch on some subjects. We'll go quick through these. I haven't talked to you guys since the Tyreek Hill news of Friday was unveiled, and we found out on Friday that the Johnson County prosecutor said that Tyreek was not the subject of a criminal investigation. There had been some confusion about that from different sources, one of which was Andy Reid, who, a couple days after it was a day a couple of months ago, said that he had heard that the case had been reopened. Now there's some confusion about whether it was or not, but at any rate, the criminal case against Tyreek is he's not the subject of a criminal investigation, and I don't know how this changes much in the story of Tyreek Hill. We're going to find out. We'll talk to Andy Reid later this week. Minicamp starts on Tuesday. So what are we to make of this?
Well, the only point I guess I'd make is that all along the thing that's really been beneath all this, and the thing we're all really waiting to hear for sure is how the Child Services sees this, and they have taken the 3-year-old. We don't know if the twins are born yet, if they're going to be with the parents. The two, as we understand it, are no longer together. So there's still something very important here that they're trying to figure out. I would assume that that stands for itself, but also that could factor into whether any charges ever ultimately come. I feel less than certain that everything is just reconciled here. And that, by the way, as that applies to the whole bigger picture here, what it will mean with the NFL, which is, seems to me between those things that we're still trying to figure out, that have kept them apart, taken them away from family, and those words he said about being terrified, I can't get past that's still going to matter in this.
Well, I think that threat, which you just the phrase that you started and didn't finish, thankfully. I think that threat is what's going to be the basis for the decision that the NFL makes with Tyreek Hill in terms of the number of games that he's suspended, and I'm pretty certain that there will be a number of games that he'll be suspended. Yeah,
I mean, the only thing I feel relatively confident in saying is that there will be some sort of punishment from the NFL. And that's as much an NFL thing as anything. I mean, Roger Goodell has shown that he does not need a conviction. He does not need charges. He does not need much to suspend someone. So that would surprise me if there's no punishment from the league. Other than that, literally nothing could come of this that would surprise me. Everything from proven completely, totally innocent Tyreek Hill to the worst. There have been so many twists and turns. You still have a DA saying a crime was committed against this boy. We don't know who, so we can't charge anybody, but a crime was committed against this boy. And then that audio leaks. And I mean, there's so many twists and turns that I don't know how you could be not even certain. I don't even know how you could confidently feel anything.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And look, one last thing about the audio thing. We know that was manipulated out of Tyreek, but we've talked about this among ourselves a few times. Those words are really horrifying words, and per our discussion we were having before we started recording, I mean, if you look at some of the things the NFL has done with less than that to work with, if nothing else, it suggests the suspension is to me is almost certain.
Under the guise of the NFL's personal conduct
yes, correct.
Policy. So that's the key phrase. Keep in mind, or at least the policy. The conduct policy is what'll rule here. Let's transition quickly to the Royals on the road to nowhere. It is unbelievable that it's up to 16 series without a series victory. Since sweeping the Indians in mid-April, they're 0-14-2 in series. That's stunning to me. I can remember sitting here with you guys, and after 20 games, or was it 40 games, projecting the Royals' record the next 40, and we were all somewhere around 500.
We were, and I'm pretty sure we talked about this last week. They were like 5-17 in that span. Now it's like 6-24 or 6-23. I mean, look, they're really horrendous. And Sam, you introduced this into your column the other day, and I think it's going to become more and more a point of thought anyway, if not stuff to write about. At some point, do you have to just shake this up with the guy at the helm?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that stuff has been talked about. I know that in the last year, and as long as I don't think it's just because of the nature of baseball, I don't think it's outlandish to say that a AAA team, if you gave them 16 shots at a big league team, they could win one series. I don't think that's outlandish. I think that is entirely possible. And the Royals, and it's crazy because their shortstop is a star. I mean, he is in a bad funk right now. He just looks like he strikes out on 2 pitches. Sometimes, Whit Merrifield looks like he's fighting it mentally, especially in situational hitting, as they say. Jorge Soler is having a really weird season where his on-base percentage is below 300 and his slugging percentage is above 500. That is unsustainable. One of those two things is bound to change. But God, they they're doing that thing that people in Kansas City have a very good eye for. Around here, we've been well trained to find a team that can do all the right things to lose a ball game. And that is where we're at. If you're going to hit well, you better give up a lot. And if you're going to pitch well, you better not hit much. And that is what the Royals are doing really consistently.
How much do you think, you're just referring to Mondesi and Merrifield, two of the bright lights on this team overall, how much at a certain point is it just part of human nature you cannot fight off, that if everything around you is just not going well in any way, that you fall into it a little bit? I mean, and I'm not saying that they're, intentionally doing that, but there's morale matters in this, doesn't it?
I think it's unrealistic to expect anything different over a course of, I know it's said so much that it's a cliche, but it's said so much because it's true. The grind of a big league baseball season is unlike the grind of any other professional sports season. And I think that, for a long time, the Royals were like 7th, 8th in runs scored among 15 American League teams. And their first 5 in the order were incredible. There was like an 820 cumulative OPS. And then the bottom 3 or 4, it was like a 550. And I think maybe this is reverse engineering, but it sure makes sense that those first 5 guys know what's up, and now they know that Martin Maldonado and Billy Hamilton and Chris Owings, when he was still around, those guys, they're just not doing anything. So every single opportunity that they get, there's even more pressure, and you press a little bit more. I think that's what I would expect has happened. I know that that's what some people around the club think has happened. And then Dozier goes out, and that creates a new, just even more.
I've seen it not only in plate appearances, but in base running too. I just think they're kind of, checked out's too strong a word, but I think it is really difficult for them to be in a good mental place.
Yeah.
Even their veterans, it's just difficult because nobody expected this.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a playoff team, but it wasn't this. It wasn't a team that's 2 games below last year's pace after 65 games, and a team that lost 104. They are 2 games below where they were at 65 games.
Yeah, and 2 games below that pace. They ended up with 104 losses, but only 104 because they came on strong at the end.
That's right. Had a winning September,
That's right.
A winning record in September.
Yeah.
I got thinking about this last night. I was tolling up the Scouts' 2 wretched seasons in Kansas City, 110 losses, and I resisted the urge to have some kind of line in there, like, what the Royals are going to have this year. But it's on our minds. I mean, they're really trending that way.
Let's stay on baseball just quickly and send some well wishes to Big Papi, David Ortiz. I mean, what a it was stunning when I saw the news. It was sort of unveiling on Twitter as I'm watching the Bruins Blues game last night, and you started seeing these tweets about David Ortiz shot at a bar in the Dominican Republic. Looks like he's going to be okay. He's going to survive. He's going to lose gallbladder and part of his colon, but that's just stunning news. And you had a great tweet today, Vahe, about this, that that David Ortiz paid his respects to Yordano Ventura. It
was really touching too. It was just at a house where the funeral was, and the little Royals entourage traveling there and some family members, and he is standing at the door on the way into the house and he's greeting everybody. I'm not sure he didn't hug me, and I've never met him before. I certainly have no relationship with him, but it was a guy looking everybody in the eye, and then there were some really touching scenes of him with Yordano's mother too. It tells you a little bit about what he means to the country and who he is.
I'll never forget. We were on the field before, I think it was Game 2 of the World Series, and in 2014, and Joe Goldberg, the Royals announcer, called me over and says, "You ought to hear this." And he plays a tape that he had recorded with David Ortiz before a regular season game in September, when it was apparent that the Royals were making a playoff push and the Red Sox were not going to be part of the playoffs that year. And it was Ortiz talking to Salvador Perez and Yordano Ventura and James Shields about, hey, you guys have a chance to do this. This city's been down for so long. get this thing done, get it done. And I went back and looked at that story today and thought, wow, for an opposing player to suggest that when they were about to play, that was before a Red Sox Royals game in September. I was touched by that. I said, what a guy this is, and as if we need to know. I mean, what he did, the game after the Boston Marathon bombing,
against the Royals, right?
Yep.
Yeah. In the last 25 years, whatever names you want to put on the list of bigger stars in baseball, it's not going to be more than a couple names, and
if any.
Yeah. And what's remarkable too, not just that, but I'd forgotten this until today. A lot of people remember that he was with the Twins, and they released him even though he was 26 and hit 20 home runs and slugged 5 something. The Twins just up and released him.
Those were good Twins teams too. They were winning the division back then.
Yeah. But he started with Seattle. He signed with the Mariners. I'd totally forgotten that. And they traded him, when he was in A-ball or rookie ball or whatever. So on his third organization, of which he joins at 27, he becomes, and Boston is a parochial place like that. It matters if you're homegrown there. It matters if the Celtics drafted you, if you've been a Patriot for a long time. And he joins them at 27 and becomes as big of a star in a town with some big time stars as they've ever had. And then, what he is in the Dominican, you don't do that just by being a really good player. There's other stuff involved in that.
Okay, let's close it out by sending our congratulations to Alana Vaughter and Alex Toda. I hope I'm pronouncing it. Tada. Thank you very much, Sam, because I know you wrote about him. Alana plays, she's a softball player at Staley, and Alex was multi-sport athlete at Blue Valley High, and they were the winners of the Kansas City Star Scholar Athlete Award that was in the paper on Sunday. And Sam, I know this is a story that you enjoy doing, and just a situation that's kind of close to you and near and dear to your heart.
It's my favorite thing that we do at the Star. I think it's the best thing that we do at the Star. I remember being a snot-nosed, high school reporter and being disappointed when I wasn't the one to get to do these stories. And I did a bunch when I was covering high schools, and I've gotten back to doing them now just because they're so much fun. These kids are ridiculously accomplished. Alana, is that how you pronounce it? Had 2 just really discouraging hospital stays, had to learn to walk again. Like when she got out of the hospital the second time, I think it was, made a list of things she wanted to accomplish, and one of them was playing sports at Stanford, and she's going to go play softball there. The best softball player in her school history. Alex Tada has never gotten a B in his life. I hope I'm right on this. All Metro in football, a 2-time state qualifier or state placer in wrestling, and made the biggest play in the state baseball championship game to help his team win the state championship last year. He's going to go to Navy. He's going to go to Navy and be a Navy SEAL and protect us. I mean, that's the kind of people that we're talking about here. These aren't just, hey, that's a good kid. These kids are different.
I'll tell you one thing that I appreciated about them as well, and this is a little bit inside baseball, but they both excelled in spring sports, and sometimes spring sports athletes get a little short thrift in this judging because the information has to be in April and May, and they're not finished with their seasons. This time, a softball player, a woman who specializes in softball, and then Alex, who plays baseball along with wrestling and football, were recognized and honored, and I was happy to see that.
Yeah. Can I say one more thing about this? I've sort of had like 2 stints now of doing these scholar athlete stories, and the first was, I'm in my 20s and single and whatever, and now I got 2 little boys, and so I'm kind of like trying to cheat a little bit and see like, how do you guys do this, and so I'm sitting there at the at their dining room table at the Tatas the other day, and I'm just sort of, hey, what'd you do? and they're just
taking
like
notes.
Yep, exactly, and they're like, we don't know. We haven't done anything. Like I was, that's not helpful. That is just not helpful. So other than that, Jennifer and Ben Tata, you guys were no help to me on that, but you guys have raised an incredible, and not just that, but his 2 older siblings are incredibly accomplished on their own right too. So it's really fun. It's refreshing to do these tours. I'm so glad that we do them.
All right, guys, that's going to do it. I really appreciate you stopping by, and we will talk to you again soon. Links to the stories we discussed can be found in the show notes and on kansascity.com. Thanks to Kathy Liu and Leah Becerra for producing today's show. I'm Blair Kerkhoff, and we'll be back soon to talk sports in Kansas City on Sports Beat KC.